When I was 6 months pregnant, I inherited a $5 million house after my husband died in an accident. 3 months later, I gave birth to a baby girl alone in the hospital. But when I came home from the hospital, exhausted and weak, I was shocked. My own parents had taken over the house completely. As I tried to step inside with my newborn, my cruel mom slammed a fire extinguisher into my shoulder hard and yelled, "You don't live here anymore." I fell to the ground holding my newborn baby, trying to protect her. I cried out in pain while my shoulder was dislocated. Dad stood over me and said, "This house is ours now. Get lost." Sister, who was inside, added, "Some widows just don't deserve nice things." I was lying on the doorstep, bleeding and clutching my days-old baby, but when I looked down at my baby's face, I froze in fear. The hospital discharge papers crinkled in my trembling hands as I stood on what used to be my front porch, 3 days postpartum, and every muscle in my body screamed with exhaustion. My daughter Grace weighed barely 7 pounds in my arms. Wrapped in the pale pink blanket the maternity ward had given us, the summer heat pressed down on my shoulders, making my dress cling to my skin. I'd called ahead. My mother answered with a strange tone, asking exactly when I'd arrive. Even then, something felt off, but grief and exhaustion dulled my instincts. My husband, Daniel, had been dead for 3 months. The crash tore through my life like a tornado, leaving me pregnant, widowed, and suddenly the owner of a sprawling estate his grandmother had left him just weeks before he died. The door opened before I could reach the handle. My mother, Sandra, stood there without a hint of warmth. Behind her, my father, Gerald, and my sister, Veronica, moved around in what should have been my living room. Boxes were stacked against the walls. New furniture had replaced the pieces Daniel and I chose together. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sandra's eyes flicked to the baby in my arms, then back to my face. "We've made some changes while you were gone." "Changes? I just had a baby. I need to get inside and rest. This isn't your house anymore," she said, voice like ice. "Your father and I are better suited to manage this property." I laughed, a desperate, hysterical sound. "Manage it? Daniel left this house to me. It's mine. You can't just—" The fire extinguisher came out of nowhere. She grabbed it from the wall mount inside the door and swung with shocking force into my left shoulder. Lightning shot through my body. Something popped. I fell, twisting to shield Grace as the concrete porch scraped my hip and elbow. She wailed, tiny face reddening with terror. My left arm hung useless at a grotesque angle. Warmth spread across my abdomen where stitches tore. The world tilted, but I held my daughter tight. "Get up and get out," Gerald said, looming over me, satisfaction in his eyes. "This estate belongs to us now. You're trespassing." "Dad, please," I sobbed. "I just got out of the hospital. I have nowhere else to go. This is my home. Daniel wanted me and the baby to have this." Veronica appeared behind him, arms crossed. "Daniel's dead," she said, a cruel smile bending her lips. "Some widows just don't deserve nice things." I tried to push myself up with my one good arm, but pain exploded into black spots. Grace trembled against me, her screams escalating. I needed to get her somewhere clean. I needed a doctor. I needed my family to help. Instead, the door slammed in my face. For long seconds I lay there, breathing through the agony. The diaper bag had fallen a few feet away. Using my good arm, I dragged myself toward it while keeping Grace tucked to my chest. Every movement sent new shocks through my shoulder. I fumbled out my phone, fingers shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. Blood soaked the side of my dress. I needed an ambulance, the police, anyone. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, but when I looked at Grace's face, something made me pause. It wasn't the panic of a new mother, it was colder than that. Her nose was small and slightly upturned in a way neither Daniel nor I had. Her ears had a distinct curve at the top I'd seen somewhere before. And her hair, fine and dark, fell in a texture that wasn't quite mine or his. Even through pain and exhaustion, pieces clicked. Daniel's late nights, the secretive phone, hushed conversations ending when I walked in, business trips that made no sense. I'd blamed stress, his grandmother's decline, the inheritance, money to manage. I'd been understanding, supportive, blind. Sirens grew in the distance. I gave the dispatcher our address and tried to keep my voice steady. While I waited, I called the only person I trusted, my best friend, Morgan. She answered on the second ring and shifted straight into action. "Stay on the line, I'm 10 minutes away." "Don't hang up." The ambulance arrived first. A paramedic stabilized my shoulder and started an IV, while another checked Grace's vitals. Police cruisers rolled up moments later. Sandra opened the door at last, her face arranged into concern. "Officer, I don't know what happened. She must have fallen on the steps. She just had a baby. You know how postpartum women can be unstable." "Ma'am, step back," the older officer said. His name tag read Bennett. "We'll speak with everyone separately." "This is our house," Gerald insisted, coming to stand beside her. "We've been living here 2 weeks. Our daughter was in the hospital." Bennett's brows rose. "And the deed is in whose name?" Pain meds fuzzed my edges, but my voice came clear. "Mine. I inherited it from my late husband 3 months ago. The paperwork is upstairs in my office. They were staying temporarily to help before the baby." Sandra's expression flickered. She'd expected me too weak to fight. She'd underestimated what fury can do. Morgan's car skidded to the curb as they loaded me. She took one look and told the officers she'd be pressing charges for assault and illegal eviction. Then she climbed into the ambulance and gripped my hand. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Then we're going to fix this." At the ER, everything blurred into lights and instructions. The surgeon prepped me. The attending raged that anyone would attack a woman days after major surgery. They whisked Grace to pediatrics for observation. I signed forms with a pen I could hardly hold, and as the gurney rolled toward the OR, one thought pulsed through the haze. If Grace doesn't look like Daniel, who does she look like? Sirens neared. I breathed, steady. Morgan kept vigil while surgeons repaired my shoulder and closed the torn incision. By morning, I woke to the hush of recovery and a choice I couldn't outrun. If Grace wasn't Daniel's, the truth would matter in every room we entered. I asked the nurse for a paternity panel. She nodded like she'd seen this before. Morgan was already building a perimeter. Before coffee, she'd called a property attorney, Malcolm Reeves, and a detective who owed her a favor. Malcolm arrived with steady calm. "First we secure you," he said. "Emergency protective order, exclusive possession of the house, freeze the estate accounts." He guided my right hand through signatures while Grace slept, a warm comma on my chest. The order was served that afternoon. Sandra texted outrage from a new number. Gerald left a recorded message calling me unstable and insisting our home. Hearing it turned fear into resolve. Malcolm's paralegal returned from Daniel's office with banker's boxes and a thumb drive. In spreadsheets, my husband's double life unrolled. Cash skimmed from clients, rent for an apartment I never knew, wires to an offshore bank. Emails with Veronica, hotel confirmations, encrypted attachments, a beach condo labeled Our First Sunrise. Worse, a memo of my mother musing about having me declared incompetent for Grace's sake. I let the nurse swab Grace's heel. The result came fast. Probability of paternity, 0% for Daniel. The numbers steadied into meaning, the ear's small curve, the damp wave of her hair. Memory opened a door. Those 2 weeks Daniel and I took space. One reckless night with my college friend Tyler Chen. He'd moved to Portland after. We never spoke again. I texted, "Tyler, it's me. I need to talk." He called within a minute. I told him about the accident, the inheritance, the assault, the test. After a careful silence, he said, "If you want me there, I'm coming." 2 days later, he stood at the foot of my bed with a cardigan his mother had mailed. He asked before he touched Grace's hand. When she latched onto his finger, he laughed and then cried. "That ear," he whispered. "Every Chen baby has it." Meanwhile, the legal work accelerated. A search warrant turned the house inside out, forged leases, a fake caregiving agreement, a ledger in Gerald's blocky handwriting tallying what they'd siphoned, $200,000, and what they expected to realize. Police booked them on assault, fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy. The DA called it a perfect storm of vulnerability and greed. I called it my life. Discharge day came with instructions and antibiotics. Outside, Malcolm, Morgan, and Tyler waited like a wall. We drove to the estate. A locksmith van idled. A security team unpacked cameras and glass break sensors. I crossed the threshold that had bloodied my knees and felt only purpose. Room by room, we reclaimed what was ours. Morgan bagged items for evidence. Tyler assembled a cradle. I chose a different wall for the bed. In Daniel's office, Malcolm found a safe key taped beneath a drawer. Inside, fake IDs, a passport with Daniel's face and a different name, Cayman flight printouts, and a ring box with a diamond larger than mine. That night, Grace slept between mesh and moonlight. I slept in pieces, waking to phantom footsteps that never came. When panic rose, I counted what was true. Grace's breath, locks changed, cameras lev, order served, family barred, letters arrived before arraignment. Sandra invoked God between manipulations. Gerald demanded I stop airing family business. Veronica swung from justification to begging to venom. Malcolm told me to save everything unopened. Evidence, not correspondence. The preliminary hearing landed 8 weeks out. In the meantime, we survived by ordinary mercies. Bottles sterilized, bills paid, short dusk walks. Tyler learned swaddling and my grandmother's kanji. When grief blindsided me by a song or a stranger's cologne, he didn't try to fix it. He stood near and let it pass. 3 weeks after discharge, I met Detective Vega to record a statement. She slid a photo across the table. Me on the porch, Grace clutched to my chest, behind me, the door already closing. "We'll need you strong for this," she said. "I'm learning," I answered. Arraignment came with jumpsuits and plea denials. On the courthouse steps, Morgan squeezed my fingers. That afternoon, an email pinged from the lab, Tyler's panel, 99.99%. I sent him the screenshot. He replied with a heart and then, "I'm here for all of it." We celebrated with takeout and a quiet promise to build slow. I wore the hospital brace. He strapped on the baby carrier. We practiced a life in careful steps. That evening, as the sun burned down to copper, the new alarm armed with a clear chime, and the house breathed like a living thing around us. For the first time since the porch, my hands didn't shake. I tucked Grace into her cradle, checked the locks, and let the silence mean safety. Tomorrow would belong to us. The weeks between arraignment and the preliminary hearing were measured in small proofs of safety. The soft click of new locks, the green dots on the security app, Grace's steady breath against my collarbone. Malcolm prepped me like I was joining his firm. Timelines, exhibits, the way to answer what you know, not what you fear. Detective Vega walked me through my own porch photo until the tremor left my voice. At the hearing, Sandra stared past me as if I were fogged glass. Gerald watched the judge the way men watch a scoreboard. Veronica wouldn't meet my eyes. The DA laid out the scaffolding, the forged lease, the caregiving agreement, the ledger with totals in Gerald's handwriting, the hospital photos, the 911 audio, and the emergency room surgeon explaining why my injuries were impact, not a stumble. The judge bound everything over for trial. Life bent toward ordinary in the spaces between. Tyler learned the rhythms of 3 a.m., bottle, burp, sway, sing the same 4 lines until tiny eyelids surrendered. Morgan turned my dining table into a war room, and our evenings into a ritual of takeout and laughter that didn't hurt. When grief ambushed me in the grocery store cereal aisle, hearing a song Daniel used to hum, Tyler didn't rush to fix it. He stood beside me while it passed. Letters kept arriving. Malcolm logged them, still sealed, Sandra's script swinging between scripture and scolding, Gerald's block caps about family business, Veronica's whiplash from justification to begging to venom. We saved them as evidence and opened none of them as apology. Trial came 13 months after the porch. On the first day, the prosecutor let the paper trail talk. Emails between Veronica and Daniel, hotel confirmations, our first sunrise condo brochures, a transfer log to an offshore account, Gerald's spreadsheet tallying what they'd already taken and what they expected to realize, and a voicemail pulled from Daniel's backup. Gerald's voice saying accidents happen all the time and mentioning the life insurance. It wasn't murder, it was a temperature check of their souls. I testified. I told the jury about the knock of metal to bone, the way my shoulder gave, the slice of reopened stitches, the door closing while I held my bleeding body and screaming newborn. I said Sandra plays tennis and hits where she aims. The surgeon followed me with clean language and angles. Detective Vega walked through the search of the house and the safe key taped beneath a drawer, false IDs, a passport with my husband's face, and a stranger's name, came in paperwork, a ring box bigger than mine. The defense tried all the tired stories, hormonal, unstable, clumsy, confused. They called it a family misunderstanding. Then Morgan took the stand and toured the jury through the fraud with corporate neatness. Tyler spoke last, careful and plain. How he arrived knowing almost nothing except that a child might be his. How Grace grabbed his finger and wouldn't let go. How he'd watched me wake from nightmares. How we changed every lock and learned ordinary again, one small task at a time. He didn't accuse. He witnessed. The verdicts landed like true north, guilty on all counts. Sandra for assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy. Gerald for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. Veronica for conspiracy and fraud with aggravating factors. At sentencing, the judge called their conduct cold, calculated cruelty against a woman at her most vulnerable. 8 years for Sandra, 12 for Gerald, 10 for Veronica. Civil court moved faster. Malcolm stacked damages with meticulous proof. Therapy notes, surgical reports, security invoices, lost work. The jury returned every stolen dollar and $3 million more for the harm you can't photograph. Their house went. Their cars. The retirement accounts that had been cushions became restitution. Tyler and I did not sprint into a new life. We checked the ground and tested our steps. He would not let me lift anything heavier than a lie for months. He learned my grandmother's congee recipe and made it better. He showed up every single time he said he would. On the anniversary of the day he'd flown back, he knelt on a flour-dusted kitchen floor while Grace flung Cheerios and asked if I wanted to build boring, beautiful days with him for the rest of our lives. I said yes, crying and laughing, my brace finally gone and my hands finally steady. We married in September in the garden the paperwork once tried to steal. Morgan stood beside me in a navy dress with pockets big enough for tissues and a pen. Grace, 18 months and delighted with petals, toddled down the path and then straight into Tyler's arms. His parents flew in and wired fairy lights through the roses. His father installed one more deadbolt for luck. We ate too much cake. We danced on grass. The house that had held their plans held our vows instead. Years open like windows when no one is rattling them. Grace learned to count butterflies on the lawn and to say daddy without thinking twice. I finished PT and found my strength in new ways. The shoulder would never be perfect, but it was mine. Morgan fell in love and brought her girlfriend to Sunday dinner. We turned Daniel's office into a light-soaked studio for Tyler and stuffed the safe with passports that matched our names. Parole hearings came and went. Malcolm submitted thick packets. No remorse. Ongoing risk. The scope of harm. The board nodded grimly and stamped denied. More letters arrived from prisons across the state. We let them arrive and let them mean nothing. On the 5th anniversary of the porch, I stood on it at dusk while Tyler and Grace chased wings in the garden. The alarms were quiet because they could be. The roses we planted the week after the verdict had climbed the trellis and spilled pink across the eaves. The estate looked like itself again, less a trophy than a home, rooms filled with crayons and camera lenses and shoes left in the wrong places. Sometimes neighbors ask how we did it, expecting a single answer. There isn't one. It was an accumulation of small choices, calling 911, asking for the test, signing the order, changing the locks, saving every letter, telling the truth, letting good people help, believing we could deserve ordinary. It was the stubborn decision to build something gentle on ground that remembered violence. Grace will grow up with that story, not the other one. One day I'll tell her about a porch and a fire extinguisher and a door that closed. I'll tell her about a different door that opened, to a detective who listened, a lawyer who prepared us, a friend who moved in with takeout and fight, and a father who came back the minute he was asked. I'll tell her that blood is biology and family is proof. When the sun slid lower, fireflies stitched green light across the hedges. Tyler scooped Grace and spun until both were laughing breathless. I went down the steps to them, the wood solid beneath my feet, the garden warm with our noise. The house behind us didn't loom. It leaned, like a shoulder, like a home. Justice had been served. My family was destroyed, and I was finally truly free.